But yeah, just to introduce myself a little bit, my name is Jermaine Hines. I have a background in entomology, so I got my master's and my PhD in entomology from the University of Maryland and at Penn State. Now I work for the SEER program. It's the Sustainable Ag Research and Educational Program, and our goal is to provide like practical guides and resources for farmers, master gardeners, and things like that around, sustainable farming, sustainable pest management, and things like that. So today I'm going to be talking to you all about bugs, right? Entomology. So um, today we I just want to start with just a quick agenda, just to give you a idea of the things we're going to cover, and just start off with just some of the topics to explore, kind of consistent with your syllabus. Then this kind of workshop is broken up into three areas. So first, we want to learn all about what an insect is, what makes an insect, and what their life cycles are. And then we'll talk a little bit about where insects live, what are their roles in the environments as pests and beneficial, and how the specifically the urban environment can impact them. And we'll also have a little bit of a chat about, the state of pollinators and what we can do to support and promote pollinators in our landscape. And then the last part, we'll go through the many orders of insects that consist of pests and beneficials, some of the common ones you're going to see in your garden, and some of the major identifying characteristics so you can have some information to go off of when you see something strange in the field and you don't know what it is. The tips I have will kind of help you get through that. Um, So by the end of today's kind of presentation, we'll talk a little bit about the importance of entomology in horticulture and agriculture. So how, insects can impact your vegetable and ornamental crops, your fruit crops. How is the insect and plant world connected? We'll talk a little bit about the role of beneficial insects versus pest insects. What are the friends and foes in your garden? Um, Actually, next lecture, we're going to talk a lot about, different urban beneficials and pests found through DC. We have probably 30 or 40 of them. We're going to go through how to identify, you know, how are they impactful and just management practices and things like that. Talk a little bit about the situation with honeybees and colony collapse disorder, as well as the importance of kind of nurturing the environment for pollinators, how to attract them, things like that. And we'll also talk a little bit about how insects fit into the food chain and food system. All right, so start off, what are arthropods? So arthropods are the precursor organisms to insects. So they're the distant relative to insects. And so arthropods are pretty much a large group of segmented animals. When you think of arthropods, you'll think of things like spiders, a lot of the crustaceans in the sea, like crabs, lobsters, things like that. Um, some of the key traits of arthropods is that they have a symmetrical body plan. So when you look at them, top down, they have the left side is equal to the right side. They're mirror images of each other. It's symmetric. The body is divided into many repeating segments. So in this kind of generalized insect, you have these many little segments, many repeating legs, many repeating body segments. So that's a key feature of arthropods. They often have a jointed external skeleton or exoskeleton. So you're looking for that hard shell, um, and jointed legs. Arthropods also often have many legs or repeating appendages. So in this diagram, you can see many individual segments. Many of the segments have that repeating kind of leg structure. Um, and as you get towards insects, you start to see some of those repeating structures get specialized for different things. Some key points: arthropods are the largest animal group in the world. It includes many groups of animals, including aquatic, so your lobsters, your crabs, shellfish, all of those are arthropods. There's terrestrial ones, including like mites, centipedes, millipedes. There's incredible diversity in there. Arthropods include all of the insects. So going from arthropods to insects. So what are insects? So insects is a subgroup of arthropods, and their body is divided into these specialized groups or regions. So sort of like a human, you may have the head region that's developed for sensory purposes, like you can see, smell, taste. You have your thorax, your limbs are connected to your thorax, and you move you can move the environment, things like that. And your abdomen typically contains like your digestion, your reproductive organs. So insects have a similar body plan. They have a head region specialized for sensing, a thorax region specialized for movement, and an abdomen specialized for, sexual reproduction and digestion. On insects, the body is divided into three distinct regions. So that's the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Other distinguishing characteristic for insects, there's one pair of antennae, there's one pair of compound eyes, there's three pairs of legs, so there's three legs, and then another set on the other side. Insects have two pairs of wings, with the caveat that some species are wingless. Fly species only have one pair of wings. So, these features can be important in like identifying species, pest species or beneficial species. Wings could be very important in identifying. So let's play a little game. Insect or arthropod. So this is your basic insect diagram, your head, thorax, abdomen. You have your antennae and your compound eye and things like that. So coming here, what do we think this is? You could say it on the mic or in chat. Um, Looking at the body regions, it has, many repeating segments. It has multiple pair of legs. It has two eyes. It has two pairs of antenna. Um, what's the vote on this one? Arthropods, arthropods, arthropods. Someone said dinner. That's right too. So again, that's a lobster, right? So classic arthropod body plan. Many repeating segments. They have two different kinds of legs, three different kinds of legs with the claw. Um, so many different segments. Let's try another one. All right, how about this one? What do you think this is? Got insect. What do we got? Arthropods. I'll let one or two more come in. Arthropod. So got many arthropods to insects, right? So this one is actually an arthropod, right? So it has many pairs of legs, repeating legs. They're not really specialized to do anything specifically like grabbing or running or anything like that. It's just kind of many repeating segments. So whereas the insects have that distinct body plan, they have the head. This has a head too, but the thorax has the three legs attached to it. This has many different kinds of legs. So the body plan here is just a repeating body plan. So this is an arthropod. This is a centipede. Let's try one more. How about that one? Insect, arthropod. This is a arthropod. Spiders, we might like to think of them as insect, but they're actually not related to insects. They're arthropods. So spiders have two body regions. So their head and their thorax is actually one unit called the cephalothorax. And so you can see the head here. They have eight pairs of eyes compared to the one pair of eyes on insects. They have four pairs of legs compared to the three pairs of legs on insects, and they only have two body segments. So this is the classic arachnid or spider body plan. Spiders are arthropods, um, but they're in the garden just like the insects are. All right. So now I just want to go through each of the different parts of the insect kind of in more detail. So first up is the head. Again, this is the sensory center of the insect. It all has structures for sensing the environment. One of those are the compound eyes. So they have these really large compound eyes, like this grasshopper. You know, it can see in every direction that these little lenses on the eye are looking from. You know, they have these and a pair of antennae they use to sense the environment, chemical signaling, things like that. And then they have this mouth structure that they use to break down food. They used to groom. Um, so taking a closer look at the compound eyes. So the compound eyes mean it's made up of many different cells. So if you take a close up of the eye, you see many of these different, cells. It's almost like pixels on your flat screen TV. And all of these individual cells or pixels makes up what the insect can see. They also have this other pair of like it's a really primitive or a basic eye called the ocellus, and that's just there to help insects tell the difference between light and dark. So if you think of something like a moth or a cockroach or something that scatters when the lights come on, they're using their ocellus to do that. So the compound eye again is made up of many smaller lenses, and you could kind of see them here in this close up. Um, Insects see this mosaic like composite image. So when you take each individual cell of their eye, it kind of makes up this composite image. It's not very high resolution, but it lets insects see in multiple directions. And this kind of vision is sensitive to movement. Human vision, we have kind of that focus cone, so we can get, high resolution, but we have a much narrower field of vision. Next up are the antennae. So the antennae are sensory organs that help insects sense their physical and chemical environment. So here's this pair of ants, all these little aphids are around there, they're collecting the honeydew from the aphids. But the ants are using the antenna to sense each other. They use this to communicate, hey, are you from the same colony? I'm from the same colony. So they use it to recognize each other. They use it to sense air currents. This is often, alongside temperature. Different insects use your antennae to kind of feel out what the air currents are, before flight. Antennas also are useful for smell in terms of locating plant cues. Different plants give off cues that insects can cue in to find a plant. Pheromones are chemicals from other insects. So prey insects can, key in on predator pheromones to avoid them, or predator can find prey based on the smell of its poop and other, different kinds of smells. They also use their antennae to, sense vibration. If you ever watch an insect and you see those little antennae going around, that's exactly what it's doing. It's sensing, the vibrations from your movement. And one more feature of the antennae is taste. And antennae could be very diverse. They have all of these different forms. And like when you're getting down to like pest identifications, some of these features can come in handy for identifying things down in species. So you can make sure you're, controlling the right thing, or make sure that beneficial is the right one. Next up are the mouth parts. So the mouth parts are used by the insects to eat and groom. They manipulate food by grinding, chewing, piercing, and sucking. And this graphic just shows some of the different types of insect mouth parts. This is sort of a wasp type mouth part. Sorry, no, a piercing, sucking mouth part. So they have these kind of their mouth is sort of like a straw where they can like pierce into leaf tissue, and they'll use this kind of blue region to kind of suck phloem and xylem, so the plant juices out. A lot of piercing and sucking insects use that. A grasshopper has like chewing mouth parts, and they use these to grip and tear the leaf, um, to chew it up. So a lot of insects that skeletonize leaves have this kind of mouth part. And then you have your proboscis type mouth parts common in butterflies. So the butterfly can extend this all the way into a flower, get out nectar. Um, so let's play a quick game of who done it, right? So mouth parts may provide clues on prey choice or type of damage a pest may cause. So let's take a look at this leaf. You come out into your front yard one day and you see this happen to your leaf. What insect do you think did this? A chewing mouth part or sucking mouth part? So a lot of times when they tell you to scout for damage or scout for insects, this can key you into what might be going out, to be going on in your field right now or in your garden right now. This is happening to my hibiscus right now. All right, we got chewing, 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 and one sucking, right? And so let's take a look. Chewing mouth parts, right? And so classic Japanese beetle, they have those chewing mouth parts. And so when they can eat out the green leaf bits between the veins and skeletonize the leaf. So many different pests kind of have this kind of damage symptom, and that could key you into something like it's a Japanese beetle, it's chewing, or it's a grasshopper, or some kind of caterpillar. Those all have chewing mouth parts. How about this one? You see these dimples in the apple that you went to a U pick farm and you notice these on some of the apples. What do you think this is? Sucking. That's the C. Sucking damage. So this is the brown marmorated stink bug, and you could see that piercing, sucking mouth part, piercing the orange or piercing the apple. And this is the kind of damage it can do on the inside. So while it might not look like much damage on the outside, it can have really big impacts on the inside of the fruit. So let's move on to the thorax. So the thorax is specialized for movement. The insect legs and the wings are connected to the thorax. So typically your wings will be on the mesa and metathorax. So pro is for the beginning, mesa middle, meta is end. So they have three thoracic segments. Um, each segment has one leg. Um, so when you look at the cicada, you can see the pro, mesa, and metathorax, and you can see a leg coming off of each one. So that's keying you into the insect body plan. When you look at it, the forewing and the hindwing are attached to the second and third thorax. So here, so that's the mesothorax here, and you can see this forewing, and then this high wing is in the back here. That's a cicada. These came out a few years ago in this area. Um, legs are appendages that are modified for moving and manipulating the environment. There's a lot of diversity in the type of legs that insects can have. Um, so this is also a good identifying characteristic. So some legs are specialized to run. So these are cursorial legs. This is a tiger beetle, and if you know anything about tiger beetles, they're very fast insects. So they have these long legs that can, facilitate running at high speeds. You think at other fast running insects, think of cockroaches, they have those long legs. Saltatorial legs are jumping legs. So they have this really muscular um, femur or thigh. And things like crickets, grasshoppers, katydids have those powerful jumping legs that they use to escape or disperse into the field, into their environment. Other insects have these raptorial style claws where this is like a pincer. They use it to grab and latch on and eat their prey. So legs can be very diverse and they can key you into the type of pest or beneficial insect you have. The next part of it is the wings, right? We mentioned that wings are on the thorax as well. So these wings are appendages that have been modified for flight, mostly. So many insects use flight to get around the environment, disperse to new habitat, find food and things like that. Um, some wings are actually specialized to help with navigation and orientation. So remember we talked about flies only having one pair of wings. So this is an example of a crane fly. We think these are often giant mosquitoes in the summertime, but they're crane flies. And you can see the one pair of wings. But you see these other two little structures down here. These are called halteres, and they use them like gyroscopes to kind of orient while they're flying. And so these are another pretty much pair of wings, but they pretty much evolved to be, used for this instead. Um, on some insects, wings can be used for protection, right? If you ever crunched a beetle and it was a bit hard, or you felt that crunch, when it travels all the way up into your stomach, like that's because the wing has been hardened for protection. Lots of beetles have that hard shell to protect them from impacts, predators, things like that. And some species use wings for communication. Wings can make sound. They can flash wings for communications, coloration, thing like that. Um, and for a lot of species like butterflies or wasps, wings are a major identifying characteristics. Things like the shape, the size of the wings, the structure, and the venation. And when we say venation, we just mean this vein pattern running through the wings. A lot of times these individual cells can key you into what a species is. So next up is the abdomen, right? And so the abdomen has segments specialized for digestion and reproduction. Some of the key features are, the heart, the digestive organs, and the reproductive structure. So this is just a generalized picture of an insect abdomen. So you see the repeating segments, you see those exoskeleton plates here. And they have these reproductive organs like the ovipositors to burrow in and lay eggs, like inside a leaf or inside bark or in the ground, in the soil. They typically have up to 11 segments on the abdomen. There's usually no legs, no wings attached to the abdomen. And this is just a cross section of an insect with some of the different, with its digestion, things like that. Tell you a little bit more about the cerci and the ovipositors. So the cerci is used to detect chemicals that can be used for communication, almost similar to the antennae. Um, and the ovipositors, they're often modified for reproduction, right? And so, um, for example, if you take a look at these damselflies here, um, the I believe this is the male is using its abdomen to clasp the head of the female, and the female is extending its abdomen up to the sperm pack on the male here, and they form this little heart-shaped dance, to mate. But it's just kind of a demonstration of how the insects use their abdomen. So here they're using the cerci to grip and hold their mate in position. Here she's using the abdomen to bring it up to the male and get fertilized. And so ovipositors are used for oviposition. So on this katydid here, you can see this ovipositor, this long kind of stinger-like or sword-like structure that they can use to burrow inside the leaf, and they'll just lay eggs. And that way the egg is inside the leaf. That way predators can't get to it. Ovipositors are often used for defense. So, if you think of bees and wasps, many of them can't reproduce, so their ovipositors have been turned into stingers that can deliver venom. When you get an allergic reaction from a bee sting, um, again, for reproduction. So in the case of the damselfly, the cerci is used to hold the mate in place, and also prey capture, right? So if you think of something like an earwig with that hook on the back of its body, it can use it can use those cerci to clasp and capture prey or to defend itself. So before we go on a break, I want to play a little game, insect or arthropod. So we talked a lot about what makes an arthropod and what makes an insect. So just to quickly review, the arthropods have that exoskeleton. They're typically symmetrical. They have jointed appendages and multi-segmented bodies. The insects, on the other hand, have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen, one pair of antennae, one pair of compound eyes, three pairs of legs, and two pairs of legs. So we're going to go through each one of these, and I want you to vote on insect or arthropod. So number one, what do we say?
Insect.
Insect, okay. Any more votes in chat or Mike?
I vote for
Insect.
insect as well.
Okay, okay. I will say I think this is the first class to all say insect. So good job with this one. This one usually trips people up, but you have the classic insect body plan. You have the two compound eyes, three pairs of legs. The wings are folded across the back, but they're still, they're still there. So you can easily key in and say that's an insect. So this is I believe it's a predaceous diving beetle. This lives in freshwater ponds and things like that. They can eat small fish. How about the second one? We all know this one, maybe. Insect, classic wasp. You can see the compound eyes, the one pair of antennae, three legs. You can see clearly the head, the thorax, and the abdomen over here. The wings. So, oh man, I would say your kid is experiencing summer. What summer if you don't get stung by a bee or caught in a rainstorm? But sorry to hear that. Um, how about the next one? What about this one?
That's an
Arthropod.
arthropod.
Arthropod. Nice. So this is a centipede. So you see just the multiple repeating units. You don't see legs specialized for grasping, running, jumping. You don't see like a specialized abdomen like in the wasp. Um, so this is a uh, arthropod. One of the other things to add here is so this is the predaceous diving beetle. So this forearms here are modified for grabbing, so they can grab fish and other small insects in the water. All right, moving on. How about this one? That's an insect. Nice. So this is classic aphid, winged aphid. Aphids have two forms. They have the alate form, which has wings, and the apterous forms. Apterous, A means without, and pteris means wings. So they can have, you can see aphids without wings. So that can throw people sometimes. They have six pairs of legs, um, wings occasionally, and they have the two compound eyes. How about this one?
Insect.
All right. Okay. This is another tricky one. This is an arthropod. This is the two-spotted spider mite, right? And so this has like one body segment, has four legs, so four pairs of legs. You can't really make out a compound eye or wings or any other of those key insect characteristics. So this is a mite. And I'm sure many of you will see this in your garden. So, it helps us like kind of knowing how to identify and a little bit about their biology will really help us know what we're, looking for or looking to attract to our gardens or looking to deter from our gardens. So that's two-spotted spider mite, arthropod. All right, how about this next one?
I'm going with arthropod for that one.
Arthropod is correct. Again, just the repeating segments, no specialization, symmetrical body plan, exoskeleton. So it's an arthropod. You can see these in your garden as well. Next, how about this one? This is an arthropod, correct, right? This is a spider, two body segments, four pairs of legs, four pairs of eyes. It's a spider, so something like that can key you into, a whole different world of spiders where you can say, is this pest? Is this beneficial? What is it eating? What does it mean, if it's on my garden or in my farm? All right, how about this final one?
Insect.
Insect. So classic three pairs of legs. You have your compound eyes, your two antennae. It doesn't appear to have wings, but these two little fleshy bits here are their wings. they're much reduced because earwigs don't really need them. A lot of times they're under debris and soil. Here's this, they have the Circe. Remember I said they can use them for defense. They can use this to clasp prey, or they can use the Circe to defend themselves. All right, so nice job with those. So it's just to goes to show you, you know, a sample of what's out there and how you can kind of get your bearings on identifying what something is. Um, I think this is a good spot for a break. Next, after the break, we'll talk about insect life cycles. So how do they develop in the environment? Because a lot of times their life state, many of their life stages look different, and that's important in how you identify them.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much, Jermaine. So yeah, before we take a break, let's take some time in breakout rooms. So share in breakout rooms. Any questions that are coming up with you for you, experience with some of these things that Jermaine's talked about so far, general ideas about bugs and beneficials and pests. So talk about that in your breakout rooms, and we'll be back in like 5 minutes. And I'll be in the main room in case you need anything. Thanks, everybody.
Be right back.
Sounds good, Jermaine. Thank you.
All right, welcome back. So for the first part, we talked a little bit about, what's an insect versus an arthropod. Talked about some of the key identifying features and some of the key anatomical structures on the insect. So now let's talk a little bit about how they developed and, how they interact with the world around them. So next up is insect life cycles. So insects develop through two main types of life. The first is called hemimetabolous development, and hemi comes from the Greek word of meaning half or incomplete. Metabolous means change or transformation. So incomplete transformation, incomplete development. So incomplete insects go through incomplete development. And so they consist of three life stages, which is the egg. The egg is pretty much uh, unable to move, it's exposed. Um, and after the eggs, it will hatch into a nymph stage. And the nymph stage usually have from 3 to 7 stages. Um, and so the nymphs typically look like miniature adults. And one of the big differences is that the nymphs never have wings. Only adult insects have wings. And that's consistent throughout all insects. Only adult insects have wings. But some adults may not have wings, like some adult aphids may not have wings. So think about how you're thinking about insect wings. And so after going through 3 to 7, we call them nymph or instar stages, they'll become an adult on their final molt. And that's when they'll reach sexual maturity and have their wings. Some of the traits for incomplete development is that those again look very similar to the larvae. There is no pupal stage, so they don't have that vulnerable stage where they can't move or anything. So when they're developing, some of the immature stages will have like these wing pads developing that you'll notice, but they're not fully developed wings. One of the advantages of incomplete development is that the adults and the nymphs can live together. They can feed on the same resources. They kind of have us, if the environment is relatively stable, think about like a grasshopper in a cornfield. Those grass fields are often relatively stable where the once they lay their eggs, the nymphs could come up in a relatively safe environment. So and when you're living in those conditions, hemimetabolism may be one of the advantageous ways to develop. So again, 3 stages: the egg, the nymph stage. The nymphs look like miniature or less developed stages of the adults. The adults have fully functional and fully developed wings. Some of the advantages to this is that adults and nymphs can share the same resources. They can occupy the same habitat and share resources or use the same resource or source. Next up, you have holometabolous insect. Holo from the Greek word whole. Metabolous change means transformation, so complete transformation or complete development. So the holometabolous develop means you have an egg stage, um, kind of undefended sessile, can't move stage. They have a larval form. Oftentimes, this is like a worm-like, a caterpillar, a maggot, something that has very limited mobility compared to like a spotted lanternfly nymph that could jump and maybe run a little bit. Caterpillars are less mobile, or maggots are less mobile. Bee larvae, when you think of those kind of insects, um, this larvae stage is somewhat undefended. Um, then, so the larval stage has 3 to 7 kind of stepwise stages before they transform in a pupa. And so this is the classic pupa from the butterfly, where the pupa is kind of suspended from the tree for a couple of days, 2 weeks. And from here, one of the risks of this is that it can't move and it's exposed. So a bird, any predator could come along and attack this. But a benefit is that during the pupal stage, the insect completely changes its body plan, right? And so the adult form and the larval form have very different appearances. Whereas the larvae is immobile and can't really move around, the adult version has wings, can disperse to new environments. So the larvae and the adult don't use the same environment. So for in the butterfly situation, the larvae is feeding on leaves. After pupation and it emerges as an adult, it's going for nectar, and it's spreading pollen, things like that. So again, the adults have a very different shape from the larval form. Um, During pupation, the body completely reconfigures itself, so the wings develop inside the cocoon. The adults can can use a different food source from the larvae. And some of the insects that undergo this complete metamorphosis are like flies, bees, beetles, anything you could think of with like a maggot form that isn't really moving around as much is most likely a holometabolous insect. So those are the ways that insects, those are the different life stages of insects and how they developed. Um, so next up, I want to just take a look at, insects, what we know about them and their role in the environment. So insects are one of the most diverse groups of animals, on the planet. Currently, there's about 1 million species described species. So there's many more out there we don't know about, don't know exist. Um, Beetles make up around 350,000 species, flies 150,000, bees and wasps 115,000, butterflies and moths 150,000, and true bugs like your aphids, spotted lanternfly, things like that make up 100,000 species of insects, and we still barely scratching the surface. So, what we don't know about what we don't know, there's estimated to be 3 to 80 million species remaining to be described. So let's talk a little bit about where insects live in the habitat, kind of the niche they take up in the world. So where do insects live? So insects inhabit almost every habitat on Earth except for the ocean. So in natural ecosystems, so these are ecosystems like woodlands, meadows, and forests that gets low disturbance from human activities. Forests, deserts, aquatic grasslands, things like that, that doesn't see much human activity. Um, Insects are often associated with plants, plant parts, soils. There's some species of insects that are specific to one type of plant, like fig wasps. They live only on figs and within figs. Um, Insects also live in semi-natural areas. So these are ecosystems that experience frequent disturbance or alteration from human activities. So things like farms, hedgerows, like highway corridors, that we mow every spring or summer, field boundaries, areas like that. insects also live there. So if you're ever out there, just part the grass, take a look at the soil, and you see a lot of things running around. Insects also live in urban areas, so they've adapted to live in areas with densely populated by humans. Um, they're major areas of natural ecosystems replaced by hard spaces, buildings, and infrastructure. So insects kind of live with humans too at this point. They inhabit plants in and around cities, so your green spaces, your gardens, trees, wildflowers, and they can live inside your buildings and any other kind of man-made structures. So here's just a little diagram about some of the semi-natural and natural areas where you can find insects. So, you know, in your meadows, you can find, butterflies looking for flowers and things like that. You know, in between, the plants on the kind of soil surface, you have different types of ground beetles running around. You have scale type insects on trees. You have bees and other insects flying through the sky so this is representative of a more natural area, low disturbance, you have different groups of insects. But as you have more increasingly disturbed areas, you start to get different kinds of insects, right? And so on your example of a farm, so in a cornfield, you might have, aphids, pest insect, you might have corn borer or corn earworm is another pest insect, but you might also have, lady beetles, spiders as predators also in this environment. So insects live in the soil. Many different kinds of insects live on top of the soil and beneath the soil, right? Many arthropods, insects, ants have their colonies in the soil. Earwigs on top of the soil under leaf litter and things like that. All kinds of diversity out there. Forests, so cicadas, when they lay their eggs in the bark of trees and they hatch and burrow into the soil, feed on plant roots. They come up and feed on bark and tree parts. Insects live in urban areas, so this is a structural pest, termites. If you're a homeowner, if you may have had a problem with something like this, or something like carpenter ants can live kind of in your home. Um, Insects also live on the water and in the water, right? So these are water striders. These are predators that can eat little small insects or even fish, in freshwater streams and things. So insects are all over if you know where to look. So let's talk about the roles of insects in the environment. So insects and arthropods fill many ecological roles that provide valuable ecosystem services such as nutrient recycling. So many insects break down tree, leaf litter, all kind of debris to break it down into nutrients that are available for smaller organisms like bacteria, fungi, and plants. It helps to kind of recycle nutrients. Different insects break down carcasses. There's actually a whole field of entomology, forensic entomology, dedicated to, the different insects that inhabit a corpse as it ages. So there's a whole different ecosystem, in a fresh corpse versus an older corpse versus a, dehydrated corpse. And that can give you important clues about what's going on. Insects and arthropods are also very important for soil aeration and turnover. So earthworms, anything that's moving the soil is, increasing aeration, drainage, things like that. It's important to know that your soil is alive with all these different organisms. Insects also are important for plant propagation and maintenance of the plant community. So some insects are pollinators, others disperse plant seeds, and others defoliate plants and eat their seeds. And finally, insects help maintain ecological balance and provide biological control. So, many of our insects eat other pest species, and many insects just in general are a food source for, other animals, reptiles, birds, and even humans. So taking a look at nutrient cycling and decomposition. So arthropods play many role in the breakdown of decomposition of organic material. So here's just like another kind of visual of the diversity. You see centipedes, beetles, fungi. So Fungi might break it down a little bit, then a beetle, and then the fungi and the bacteria, and just letting those nutrients be available for, smaller organisms to use. Um, Fruit flies feed on decaying vegetation. So sure all of you have gotten that fruit flies in your kitchen. Sow bugs or roly-polies eat decaying organic matter. Carrion and dung beetles will break down hair, animal bones, and dung. Nutrients recycled by insects, fungi, and bacteria they put it into plant available forms. So this machine is working to kind of recycle nutrients for all of the smaller organisms. Insects also play a major role in pollination and seed dispersal. So insects are closely linked to the plant community. Plants depend on insects to reproduce and disperse, so spread pollen, spread their seeds, spread their plant parts and migrate. So through their activity, many insects are pollinating flowering plants. So your monarch butterfly is reaching down to get a nectar drink, but while doing that, its body will rub on pollen, and when it moves to a new plant, it will brush off some of that pollen, facilitating plant reproduction. Other insects, eat seed or help disperse it. So this is a fairly common ground beetle. If you look outside in the grass, you might see one of these running around. So you can see it's destroying this plant seed right here. So this is contributing to your, reducing your weed pressure. And then your classic honeybee, pollinating. And so over 75% of global food crops depend on pollination by insects, with the rest being wind pollinated food like grains and things like that. The last estimate was 235 to 577 billion dollars that insects are contributing to the global food production just through their ability to pollinate. So again, some species of insect forage for seeds to eat, reducing the population of weed seeds. And some of the classic important pollinator groups are bees and wasps, butterflies and moths, and some beetles. Finally, insects help maintain ecological balance and provide biocontrol. So these were the black and orange crawlers I was talking about earlier. If you've seen this on your car or something in the early summer, this is a lady beetle, and you see them grabbing this aphid. It's all dried out, and it's done. Here's another one that it looked like it got to. So in the background, these natural enemies or these predators are doing a lot of pest suppression. So insects are food for a wide range of organisms. It's an important resource for all terrestrial and even some aquatic food webs. Fish will eat insects that fall into, streams, rivers, lakes. So birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, fish all depend on insects, to support their community. Insects control the population of other organisms. So insects eat and are parasites in many species. So some insects are predators, some insects make other organisms sick. And so that can help control them. Insects are important defoliators of plants and seeds. So, every fall when we get that, great push of leaves, insects, and other arthropods help break that down into pretty much mulch or soil. Um, Humans benefit from the insects that attack pests of agriculture and human property. This is called biological control, right? And so you're using one organism to suppress another. And so this is just a visual of, insects being key to a lot of different communities. When we get the cicadas, all of the animals go crazy. Cats are eating them, dogs are eating them, groundhogs, all kind of different animals are out kind of eating, getting a little boost from the cicada emergence. Um, so let's talk about insects as beneficials in urban areas. So beneficial insects provide important ecosystem services that are important to horticulture, including pollination. So they pollinate edible flowering plants. Many different species of bee, not just honeybee. There's squash bees, there are bumblebees that help pollinate native plants. And oftentimes our native pollinators are more effective at pollinating our native plants than the bumblebee is. So it's important to protect the native pollinators. Um, Insects in the urban areas also provide biological control. So many insects are pest predators, and weed seed predators. So on this hornworm, you see it's, all of these little eggs are stacked up on top of it. This is actually a parasite. Parasitoid wasps attack this caterpillar, and now the larvae, remember, of that insect is kind of consuming this from the inside, and eventually it will, this is a pupa, this is a holometabolous insect. So after it emerges, it's gonna be in its adult form with wings and everything. It can reproduce and attack other pests. I've included some beneficial insect resources here. So you can use this, you can use either of my presentations as resources to find, publications and other helpful resources related to entomology and IPM. Um, so next, let's talk about insects as pests. Many insects are pests to humans, but how do we define what exactly a pest is? So there's over 1 million pests of insects. I mean, there are over 1 million species of insects, and only a small percentage of those insects are pests. And so a pest is any organism that causes direct or indirect damage to a human interest, such as food crops, property, or human health. Right. And so here are some examples of that. So we have spotted lanternfly. It can be a nuisance in that they could be on ornamental trees, but they can also cause a lot of damage and kind of lead the way for secondary infections. So it could be property damage. It could be like visual, because we like our ornamental plants. Other insects and arthropods can affect human health. So this is a tick. Ticks spread things like Lyme disease, and so that can be a big problem for some communities. Insects are also um, pests of structures. So you see termites can damage human buildings and structures. Um, Caterpillars can damage food crops. Um, Mexican bean beetle can, damage your legume type crops. So these pest insects will cause direct damage to fruit and flower parts of plants. They can cause indirect damage to plants. So this is if, a insect, you know, attacks a plant, and then a bacterial infections can, a secondary infection can happen because a bacterial infection can infect the wound or a virus or something. So that's what you mean by indirect damage to the plant. There are also disease vectors. Mosquitoes can spread, numerous different diseases. And again, structural damage by carpenter ants or termites, another kind of species like that. So, but it's just a organism that causes direct or indirect damage to human interests. So next, let's talk a little bit about insects in the urban environment. So since this is UDC, and there's a lot of urban farming and urban gardening, we're going to talk about how the urban ecosystem affects insects. So insects in the urban environment. So insects pretty much maintain their ecological roles, but they can face additional challenges in the urban ecosystem. So in urban ecosystems, there's often fragmented habitat patches, and that's pretty much anytime you see green fields or trees broken up by hard surfaces or asphalt, these represent areas that insects aren't as likely to cross. So if you have like flying insects here or crawling insects, can they disperse across these streets? Can they effectively disperse to new areas to keep their population up, or to find resources? So some of the designs of urban areas can impede how insects get around. There could be a lack of food and shelter, so the development can get rid of flowering plants, water sources, just areas of green coverage that these insects might use to survive. Urban areas also have frequent disturbance. This can be noise pollution, light pollution, any kind of tilling the soil, pesticide sprays in the area. Pesticides can drift and affect, insects. If they're treating pests and then the beneficials eat those pests that are treated, they can have impairment in the predators, things like that. Urban environments also are characterized by higher temperatures. In some cases, this can be good for some insects because insects develop based on the temperature. So warmer temperatures mean faster development up to a point. And so in some cases, we actually see like higher activity and for example higher hotspots for bees and pollination in urban centers. So when you're taking advantage of your green spaces to plant flowering plants that are that are staggered throughout the season, that can be a very important resource for bees and other pollinators. This spring, take a second out to watch some of your flowers and see what visits it in maybe a 5-minute time, and you can get an idea. So some of the potential advantages towards insects in the urban environment includes it being a hotspot for bees and pollination. In some cases, there's higher species diversity. Again, if there's a higher diversity of ornamental plants and green space, you can see that, as well as increased flower visitation in these kind of small pockets, of flowering plants. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about the pollinator situation. So, we've gotten some of the reports that we've seen, lots of decline and things like that, and not only pollinator, but insect abundance, right? And so these are some of the suspected causes of that contributes to it overall, right? And so studies show global decline in insect and arthropods, but especially pollinators. And so, these are just a summary of some of the threats to insects. These can include pollution, so chemical pollution, so insecticides, light, sound pollution, degraded waterways, and things like that can have impacts on our pollinators. Urbanization again, breaking up those habitat patches can make it difficult for pollinators to disperse, and it can make it difficult for pollinators to find good resources. Introduced species can come along and displace native species, in case if they're better equipped to like take advantage of a resource. Like for example, spotted lanternfly is here. It may be more effective at getting feeding on plants than other types of plant hoppers and things like that, and can displace those other ones. Agricultural intensification, so doing things like intensive tillage, spraying border rows, fragmenting, fragmentation of fields or wooded areas, removing wooded areas into the agricultural production that reduces habitat for our native pollinators. And these are just many of them. Droughts, climate, climate change, colder, warm winters where insects can survive. And then droughts where droughts can stress plants, and stressed plants have less defenses towards pests, and so that could cause like kind of increased stress to native species that pollinators rely on. So this is just a large scale summary of kind of some of the threats to pollinators. Colony collapse disorder. So this is so a colony collapse disorder kind of was this symptom that we first discovered back in 2006. This was when I was in high school. And what they were noticing is that worker bees were abandoning the colony. They were leaving behind a healthy queen and food resources. And so this was a big thing around the time. We were seeing like 50% colony losses. But since then, it seemed to calm down with information kind of about the causes, right? And so that included a parasitic mite. So the varroa mite is a mite that infiltrates the colony and kind of attaches to the bees, and it sucks out their blood. And so the bees are more stressed, they're weaker, they can't navigate as well. So in combination, there were other emerging viruses at the time. I believe it was the Israeli acute virus that that was also in combination, and a fungal parasite called Nosema. So many of these factors were working out the bees at the same time, in addition to stress, right? Every year, bees are trucked all around the country to pollinate orange, almond orchards. So from Florida to California, they trek around the country. That could be very stressful for bees because every time they stop, they have to reorient themselves to their hive, to go out, find flowers, and find a way back. And then, the next week they're in a different state. So that could be disorienting for bees over time. And so kind of the theory is that all of this stuff contributed to these large scale die-offs that we've seen and heard about. I want to say since then we haven't seen major losses, but a lot of the focus is on keeping healthy colonies. A lot of research now is about how to kind of select and breed for healthier queens to just have a stronger colony to kind of and keeping track of bee die-offs. So there's a lot of like IPM going on into kind of reducing the impact of colony collapse disorder. Native pollinator health. This is where a lot of conservation is going into. Many native pollinators are in decline. Things like you've heard about the monarchs, bumblebees, ground nesting bees are in decline because of some of the reasons we talked about earlier, right? And so some of the challenges are pests, poor nutrition, pesticides exposure, and apiculture practices that we just talked about. So how do we support our beneficial insects? That was a bit of doom and gloom, but there's a lot of practices you can use, at your small scale and at larger scales to help insects. The very first one is keeping soil covered. So vegetation serves as a habitat for foraging cover and for insects. So if you go outside and you just part the grass, I guarantee you're going to see something. So that's telling you that insects love vegetation. You also want to add diverse vegetation, focusing on native plant species that are adapted to the environment. You want to focus on larger interconnected patches because insects use that to navigate through the environment and get to different areas where there are resources, where there's habitat. Um, Another thing you could do is add refuge sites to support beneficial insects. So these could include temporary habitats like bee boxes or other nesting sites. You can add water sources to your garden, like garden ponds, especially on hot days to help. Bees and bumblebees are a lot of times you can see them out in on hot days. You can see them lethargic. So a water source it could go a long way for them. Another thing is to just, in general, reduce the level of pesticide. Many pesticides have non-target effects on many beneficial insects. So, bees that take up pollen from a sprayed plant that can impact the bee. A predator that eats a herbivore that fed from a sprayed plant can bioaccumulate in them and slow them down or cause sublethal effects. So this is just a visual of some of the things you can do in your landscape garden, your backyard to kind of support those beneficial insects. So keep your trees. Many insects use them for habitat, shelter, food sources, things like flowering shrubs, a variety of different flowering species. And you want species that flower through the year. So what's flowering in May? Was flowering in June, July, August, September, to the end of the season. There's these different like bee boxes you can use to encourage bees. Rock piles can attract these pill bugs and things like that. You want a kind of a robust living kind of ecosystem. So again, you want to keep soil covered, add diverse vegetation, add refuge sites to support beneficial insects, and in general, reduce your level of pesticide use. We'll talk a lot about this in the IPM. How do you kind of escalate when you have a pest that you're dealing with? And this slide is just showing some of the choices of native species that are are native to this area. And this is just a reference page. So you see the diversity of different flowering types, they bloom at different times, and they'll support your native pollinators. And I've included a list of, just helpful resources from, Extension. The Xerces Society is a really good one with pollinator resources. Um, and so please explore these, if you're looking for resources. And with that, I'm going to stop here. So that was all about, insect development, what their role is in the ecosystem, how they're impacted by urbanization, and just how we can support our beneficial species in general. For the next part, I'm going to talk about, the major groups of insects. They're not going to be pest focused, but I want to give us kind of like a sample of the different kinds of insects so you can know how to key in. So we'll talk about maybe 20, 30 different insects after the break.
Awesome.
Can I ask a question before we break
Yeah.
into groups?
Yeah.
On that last diagram of the landscape features, one of the elements is a bee lawn. Can you
Mhm.
say more about what a
Yeah.
bee lawn
So
is?
so a bee lawn can be the way I think of it like as a clover lawn, or if your lawn is going to um sprout into flowers. It could be dandelions. Dandelions are, beneficial for very many different purposes, right? They have medicinal purposes. They're interesting to pollinators, things like that, right? I've seen people talking about clover lawns. So if your lawn um, flowers, if that's what I consider. I put this ajuga plant in my front box, and it covers the ground, but it has these really nice purple flowers earlier in the year. So I would kind of consider that something like a bee lawn. I don't like prune or mow. Like I have some hostas in the front, and the flowers are still out, and I see bumblebees in them every day. So that's your ornamental plants can be a resource. I see ants in them. Ants can move pollen. You know, um, it's a good question.
So basically, bee lawn is a
Yeah, a
flowering
flowering
lawn.
lawn. Yeah,
Perfect.
flowering lawn. More people are choosing to um kind of forego mowing in the spring. Like even I think the state of Maryland or certain counties, you'll see the sign out on the highway, not mowing till May to protect the bees. Have you seen those signs out in the wild? Yeah. So that's hinting at their initiatives to try to support the pollinators. Like mowing much later in the year after, the spring flush of insects get their pollen, get their flowering plants.
Thanks, Jermaine. Yeah, I imagine bee lawn too is also about like not using herbicides to not
Mm,
just have grass, but have more like
yeah.
diverse plants on your lawn that can become habitat uh for pollinators
Good.
too.
That's a great addition, Ellie. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thank you all. Yeah, so let's go ahead to our breakout room. So we'll take like 5 minutes, share. It's a lot to hear about pollinators in trouble, but also hopeful to hear about what we can do as master gardeners all across the district to spread the word about landscape practices, what we can do to help create more habitat for pollinators. So let's take like 5 minutes, share your thoughts, ideas with each other, and we'll be back. Give me 1 second. All right, see you all back here soon.
All right. So the last part of this class is going to be about horticulturally important insects and arthropods. Let me make sure. All right. So there's over 30 insect orders and many orders of arthropods. And so what's an order? So an order is just a taxonomic ranking that classifies organisms based upon morphological similarity. And morphological just means looks, its appearance. Um, so insects and arthropod groups are important to gardeners include many non-insect arthropods, so pill bugs or sow bugs, spiders, daddy longlegs, and things like that. There's hemimetabolous insects like dragonflies, grasshoppers, lacewings, true bugs, and thrips. And then there's holometabolous insects. So remember we talked about um, hemimetabolous being incomplete development, that's life cycle, and then you have holometabolous, which is complete development, which are your beetles, your butterflies, and like your flies and your moths. So we're going to go through each of the groups and talk about some key ways on how to identify them and just some basic things about their biology. So first up, you have your pills and sow bugs. Those are in the order Isopoda. So iso means equal, poda means feet. So they have feet that are equal lengths, right? And so they have these sow bugs, classic roly-poly shape, and they have these little repeating segments and these little legs under there. They're typically flat, and they live under, you can find them under, rocks where there's, or leaf debris where there's sort of damp soil. They're scavengers, so they help with that nutrient recycling. They break down organic matter. They can be an occasional pest that feeds on young plant, but you don't usually have to treat for something like this. You could do something simple as take away the rocks to dry out the soil, and they'll probably clear out. Many of them are active at night. Um, Next up, you have your spiders. So they're in the order arachnids and in the family Araneae. So these are your classic arachnids. They have two body segments we talked about earlier. So they have that head region where the head and the thorax is. Remember, the thorax has the legs. So you see each of the legs are coming off the cephalothorax, and then they have just this abdomen. So they only have two segments. They have four pairs of legs, four pairs of eyes. Spiders are often important generalist predators, so they eat anything smaller than them often, sometimes even insects larger than them or similar size. Um, they have different lifestyles. Some spiders are web buildings. This is a golden orb weaver in Maryland. They build these large webs that insects or birds can get trapped in, and they paralyze and then feed on them. Some spiders are active hunters. This is a ground spider or wolf spider. You'll see on the they're very quick, and they run, they actively hunt their prey. And then you have some ambush spiders. This is called a salticid spider or a jumping spider that can actually jump and attack their prey. So you can see this one with like a fruit fly or something. So spiders are important generalist predators. If you see them, they're generally good to have around. Next up are the daddy longlegs at the harvestmen. So these are in the same order as the spiders, Arachnida. See, they have a similar spider look, but they're in the different family called Opilianes. And some of the key characteristic of these daddy longlegs is that they don't have any antennae that you typically see in insects. They have 8 long, thin legs, just like, the spiders. But the difference here is that the legs are over 30 times their body length. So if you look at the daddy long leg, this is just the length of their body. But if you look at, some of the longest legs, it's very long compared to the length of the body. Compared to the arachnid spiders, there's no waist between the head of the body, so it appears to just be one segment. Um, these are actively hunting prey, other soft-bodied insect, things like mites, slugs, thrips, slugs, things like that. You can see here, this daddy longleg has a little aphid, in its fangs. So these are generalist predators doing a lot of this work in the background. Next, you have your centipedes and millipedes. They could belong to multiple orders. Your centipedes, pretty much centi means 100, pede means feet, so 100 legs. Your centipedes are typically having this long antennae, one pair of legs per body segment. So if you look at each unit, it has one pair of legs going across under it attached. So one pair of legs. Many of the centipedes, have these first couple of legs modified into like a claw or jaw, and some of them are venomous, so they can, when they attack their prey, they can inject venom to help them hunt. They'll attack small insects, sometimes spiders. So, you know, they're generalists. So sometimes you can see spider attacking other beneficial insects. It's just nature. But this is less likely than, a spider going after a prey, a pest prey insect. Then you have your millipedes, which are on the other side. These are the 1,000 legs. So milli means 1,000, pede means feet, so 1,000 legs. Millipedes, on comparison, centipedes have these short antennae. Each of their body segments have 2 legs coming off. So you see these 2 legs there. They usually have over 30 pairs of legs. So compared to the centipede, there's way more legs. They usually have this round cylindrical body, almost like a pen or a pencil, whereas the centipedes are flat. And these are scavengers, often like feeding on organic matter and things like that. So centipedes are usually hunters, millipedes are usually scavengers. Next up, you have your mites. So mites are tiny arthropods, is usually less than a millimeter in size. So similar to spiders, they have um, 8 legs. They lack any kind of antennae. Their body appears very flattened in a flat form. Their body appears fused. So instead of seeing that head, thorax, abdomen, you see one fused kind of unit. These are often mites are often found on plants. You have plant or herbivorous mites, but you also have predatory mites. Some of them attack, two-spotted spider mites. Some of them attack thrips. So these can be pests or beneficial species. It's really important to the identification. You want to take in whatever other environmental clues. For example, two-spotted spider mites, will attack plants, and the damage will cause the leaf to curl up and dry out, and they'll web up the plant. Those are good clues to key in on what kind of mite this is. Other mites are predatory. This is a predatory mite attacking a two-spotted spider mite. So it's all depending on what's in your environment. So both important herbivorous pests and predators. Springtails, these are also, again, non-insect arthropods. So we're not getting into the insects yet. So this springtails are in the order Collembola. There are also these tiny little organisms that you often found in soil or moist soil. These are a very good biological indicator of healthy soil. So in healthier soils, you see higher amounts of these and in a greater diversity. They call them springtails because they have this little organ on their back that they can flick out, and when they flick out, it causes them to like jump. So springtail, the tail is a spring. They're typically found in moist soil, leaf litter, near water, in well-watered plants. You'll see them sometimes, but they're not pests. They're a good indicator of biological activity. Um, Many of them are decomposers, feeding on fungi, bacteria, soil microbes. Remember, we talked about many insects or arthropods being in the soil and the ecosystem services, recycling nutrients. Rarely are these damaging to young plants. So these are just other things you might see in your field or in your garden. So now getting into the insects. So we have some of the oldest insects, the most primitive insects. You have your dragonflies and damselflies. They're in the order Odonata, and Odonata means toothed wings. Um, and these are both aquatic and terrestrial general predators. So they exist in terrestrial environments, so they're flying around, they can attack prey, and in the water, they also exist as these kind of nymphs. They can swim around, they'll eat mosquitoes, they can even attack little small fish. and things like that. They're an important part of aquatic environments. Both of their wings are typically similar in size and shape. So for dragonflies, you have these long, wide wings, folded, that they're not folded, kind of spread out like airplane wings. The damselflies, on the other hand, has their wings folded over their back, but again, they're similar in size. And the damselflies tend to be a little bit more needle-like. So, in summary, dragonflies have the thick, robust cylindrical body. They have these large eyes that are often touching up top. So these are important, how you identify them, right? Is it a dragonfly or damselfly? You know, a good characteristic, are the eyes touching? If so, you may have some sort of dragonfly. If the eyes are not touching and they have like a smaller, thin body, it's most likely a damselfly. And kind of in general, dragonflies are predators. They're, you know, you want these around your yard. They're important for mosquito and gnat control or gnat management. Next up, you have your grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids. They belong to the order Orthoptera. Ortho means straight. Ptera means wing, like pterodactyl, your winged dinosaur. Ptera means wing. So these are your straight-winged insects. So they have this sort of straight wing folded over their body. One of the key characteristics with this, they have these forewings that are thickened compared to something like a bee wing where you can see right through it. The grasshopper wing it's almost thickened and leathery, and that offers some protection. The grasshoppers, crickets, and katydid, they always have these powerful hind legs meant for jumping. Remember, we call these saltatorial legs, made for jumping, and this helps them disperse, evade predators, get around. They generally have chewing mouth parts so they could chew up a leaf, break down those plant tissues. They're often generalist herbivores. Grasshoppers, crickets are usually eating different grass or broadleaf plants. Sometimes they'll feed on beans, leafy vegetables, but they're never really a major pest. You know, in some areas of the world, these are locusts and they can, decimate entire fields, but here, not so much. Next up are your mantids or your mantises, your mantodia. These are classic, triangular heads. They have these really large eyes. They have a long thorax. Remember, the thorax are where the arms and legs are attached. So this is a long thorax with the arms, the other legs. They have this key grabbing arm of the raptorial forelegs. So these can pinch together and grab any prey, helps them eat. So there's these large generalist ambush predators. They're preying on moths, aphids, flies, caterpillars, grasshoppers, crickets, anything smaller than itself. They're generalists. They often eat other predators, but having them around is still good for your overall kind of, backyard.
Can I ask just a question? Because
Yeah.
last year I had
Yeah.
a mantis in a plant in my yard, and I had taken a picture of it and put it on social media, and a bunch of people said that it was an invasive, I think a Chinese mantis.
The Chinese mantis, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
so is that a situation where maybe not so beneficial,
well, I
or?
think it's not so much as an invasive pest, because it is, attacking a lot of the pest species we have, the Chinese mantis. So while it is a new species, it's not as invasive as some other predators can be. For example, you have, lady beetle, the multicolored Asian lady beetle, that's way more effective at eating aphids than our native seven-spotted or our CMAC ladybug. And so those lady beetles can displace our native ones because they're just that they eat a lot more aphids compared to our native species. So that competition for resource, they're displacing them over time. I'm not so sure I've seen it for the Chinese mantis, even though they're non-native species, they can still provide that ecosystem service of, suppressing prey insects.
The one that I took the picture of was eating a monarch butterfly. So yeah.
Uh-oh. But there you
Yeah.
go. Yeah, see, generalists, that means they will eat anything that's
Anything.
available. And so
Yeah.
sometimes, you see a spider attacking a butterfly, you're like, we're on the same team. But
Fair.
yeah, no, it's a little bit of chaos in it. Um, Next up are your lace wings. So those are Neuroptera. Neuro means net, ptera means wing, so your net-winged insects. Um, so these classic, they often, you have your green lacewing and your brown lacewing, but they have these net-like wings and they're folded tent-like over their back. These are very important like larval predators. The egg stage is laid like on the stalk. So if you've ever seen this on your plant, this is a good insect to have. This is the larvae form, right? We talked about um, holometabolous insects. So the larvae look very different from the adult. It even have these piercing, sucking mouth parts that it used to attack aphids. When it's an adult, you see the mouth parts have changed into more of a chewing mouth part. Um, these are also pollinators. Um, so so you see the distinct pincer-like mouth parts to capture prey, feeds on aphids and soft-bodied prey. These are an important one to have. Um, so moving on, your true bugs. So whereas the Neuroptera was mostly beneficial insects, true bugs can be both. So your true bugs are in your order Hemiptera. Hemi means half, like hemimetabolous or incomplete. Ptera means wing, so it's like your half wing. And so one of the key features is that their wings aren't like armored or tough like a beetle, but they're instead soft and somewhat leathery. It offers some slight protection. We call that a hemielytron. And so on the squash bug, you could kind of see the thickened part here and some of the more membranous wings here. Um, your true bugs, one of the major characteristic that they all have is that hemielytra, the thickened winged, but they also have these piercing, sucking mouth parts, right? And so, this squash bug has a piercing, sucking mouth part. Spotted lanternfly, you can see it here. It could bore into bark. Your aphid has it, where it could bore into the stem of plants and suck out any plant juices. Someone asked about the crepe myrtle scale. So under all of this kind of woolly kind of residue here is a flattened insect, and it has a little needle that it bores into the bark, and it just sits there. It's protected by the scale on the back, and it'll just sit there and just suck out everything from the plant. And so that's how they cause their damage. A lot of times the scale can, ward off predators, and so they're relatively safe like this. Sometimes pesticides won't even get through this effectively. So that's why scales could be a little bit tricky to manage. So many important pest species, 1, 2, 3, 4, but many of them are also beneficial predators. And we have an interesting activity on this next week. Next up, you have your earwigs. We talked about this a little bit earlier. So those are the Dermaptera. Derm means skin, ptera means wings. So your skin wings, you see it has this reduced, soft, fleshy wing pad here in the adult version. So that's why they're named like that. So they have those reduced feathery wings. Another characteristic is this pincer-like shape on their abdomen. They use for prey, hunting prey, defending themselves, other things like that. They generally have this soft body, and you can find them living in soil, under rocks, leaf litter, similar to sow bugs. Earwigs are omnivorous, so they can eat plants and animals, so like soft-bodied insects, occasionally eat plant material. So um, another one you're likely to run across. Then you have thrips. Thrips are most often plant pests. So they're in the order Thysanoptera. So thysano means fringed or tassel, and ptera means wing, so your tassel winged insects. So they have these, you notice their wings have these like hairy tassels coming from them. And that's a really easy way to identify thrips. In addition, they have this long spindle-like body shape, and they're often very tiny, less than a millimeter. They have those narrow bodies, and they have two very prominent eyes. And their piercing, sucking mouth parts leave pale areas on the leaf surface. Again, important pests of horticultural plants. You have like Western flower thrips, onion thrips. They could cause a lot of damage. Next up, you have your beetles. So they're in the order Coleoptera. Coleo means sheath. Ptera means wings, so your sheath-winged insects. And they have this distinct feature called an elytra. And so their outer wings are completely hardened. This is where that crunch comes from when you crunch a beetle. So their wings, there are hardened wings. So the elytra, they're hardened outer or forewings. And so underneath that, they have a soft pair of wings that they use to actually fly. And so if you ever notice the beetle flying, they're not very good at flying. They're almost clumsy and bump into things. And this is kind of why, right? They have less maneuverability because of that hardened wing. Beetles are one of the most diverse groups of insects found on every terrestrial environment. Beetles also have this kind of larval characteristic grub stage, if you think like of a Japanese beetle or something like that. They have this grub kind of like maggot stage that isn't very mobile or isn't as mobile as the adult. And beetles come in all flavors. They're omnivores, so they eat plant, and animal. Herbivores, many of them could be plant pests, things like cucumber beetle. They can skeletonize leaves. They can spread bacterial infections. So these can be very damaging pests, but they can also be beneficial insects like ladybugs. And they can also be important pollinators. This is a soldier beetle, and you could kind of see that hardened outer wing, that elytra here, and you see pollen all over it. So when this goes to the next plant, it's also spreading pollen. Next up, you have your butterflies and moths. So they're in the order Lepidoptera. So lepid means scale, ptera means wing. So they're your scale-winged insects. I'm sure you've all heard that rumor oh, don't touch a butterfly's wings because you'll, rub them off. What you're rubbing off are those tiny little scales all over the wings. If you ever thought of that. So all of these little powder-like things are scales. Butterflies has two pairs of large wings that are covered in scales. They typically have this long proboscis. This is the mouth part. And you can see it unrolling it going into the plant. That's how it gets its nectar. You could get some pollen on its body. See its feet touching the flower. So they're important pollinators. So many butterflies have these knobbed antennae, see this club-like structure at the end there, and that's the antennae can help you kind of make more clear identification between like butterfly or moth or what species. Um, they have this distinct larval caterpillar form, Form, and so this caterpillar actually has three pairs of legs. So the three pair of legs are actually up here. And all of these are actually not really legs. They're just, parts of the body that they're used to grip. Their legs are up here. And these are called, they have false legs called prolegs on the abdomen. And it's an important pest and pollinator species. So this is a tomato hornworm. It could be very destructive. But you also have the monarch, which is, a beneficial insect. Next up, you have your flies. They're in the order Diptera. Di means two. Ptera means wing, two wings. We call that because they appear to only have one pair of wings. But if you take a closer look, you'll notice that the other wings are kind of these little knobs that are specialized for like orientation during flight. Flies typically have these sponging, sucking, piercing mouth parts. And so that can be for, taking up pollen, but they can also, breach and get into plants. So you have pests and beneficial flies. So this is a seed corn maggot. The larvae form burrow into like young seedlings and can completely destroy them. But you also have pollinator type flies. This is a syrphid fly, and you can see it mimicking like a bumblebee, this black and yellow sort of color scheme. But you see these huge eyes, and you see this short antennae. The antennae is often a nice way to identify, and you see that sucking, lapping mouth part. Um, Flies fill a range of different niches, from omnivore to herbivore to predator. Some are detritivores, some are pollinators. So some of those identifying characteristics can really key you into, do you have a problem or, beneficial on your hands? Next, you have your bees and wasps. Um, Hymenoptera, hymen means membrane, ptera means wing, so membrane winged insects. So they have two pairs of membranous wings that you could see through. They have they have a very distinct waist at their abdomen. Um, so again, venation is so the way the veins are in the wings, that's a really big identifying characteristic for many bees and parasitoids and all, those kind of things. So the bees and wasps also have this distinct ovipositor in the females. Like bees and wasps can use it to sting. Others use it to oviposit. So this aphid parasitoid is using its egg to lay an egg into this aphid, and as the larvae inside grows and develop, it'll eat the aphid from within, causing it to develop into this. We call them aphid mummies. You probably see those before. So this is a good site to have on your plants. If you see these, that means that your biocontrol is working. You may not just need to spray yet. So that's you're looking for things like this when you're assessing. So as far as their ecologically important roles, they're pollinators of most cultivated species, as well as generalist predators. You can often see wasps taking away caterpillars or other small insects, soft-body insects. And again, some wasps are parasites of pests. Remember, I said other insects can be pests. Some insects could be parasites within others. This is one. And so with that, that's all of the major orders of insects. We talked about predators, we talked about pests, we talked about beneficials. And see, these are just some of the basic large groups that you're gonna see. So anything you see in your garden should sort of resemble something you see here. And that can go, knowing some of the basic identifying characteristic goes a long way in helping kind of you get started on the integrated pest management side, which involves a lot of identification, knowing the characteristics of the predators, the pests, and how you can use that to your advantage in your landscape to kind of to attract beneficials and deter pest insects. And the next parts of the slides are just resources that I have available for everyone. You're welcome to use this PowerPoint as a resource. I put a lot of different available resources. For example, how to get help identifying insects. There are many useful ID resources like Bug Guide, Discover Life, iNaturalist.org. That's an app that I use. You could just take a picture and post it, and people will, chime in on what it is. A very important step is consulting with local cooperative extension. So your extension agents are keyed into a lot of the publication, the resources. A lot of people are asking similar questions, so they know where to point you in case you need certain resources. Every land grant university has an cooperative extension, and I've included a directory here. So, we're in DC, so a lot of the resources in the Northeast, the South can be relevant to us. So, look around in neighboring states if you can't really find. But Maryland and UDC has some resources as well that I included. These are different books and websites that I've included, like field guides to insects to help you identify. Feel free to use this as a resource. More additional reading and glossary and just stuff to help you with the course. Here's my contact information. I am with SARE, the Sustainable Outreach Program, so Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, and we also have publications on like how to manage pests, how to manage weeds, things like that. You're welcome to reach out with any kind of questions, and I can answer those. But other than that, that's all I have for today. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I was just noticing, I don't think you talked at all about ants.
Answer in Hymenoptera. I
Okay.
didn't include them. Well, so yeah, I can go back to this page. Yeah, ants are in this group. That's actually a good catch.
Oh.
Bees, ants, and wasps. So your ants are just pretty much wingless bees, right? They're pretty much wingless bees. They adopt that same social behaviors. Some ants have stingers. So if you've heard of like the cow killer velvet ant, with the like the black and red, and they have these crazy stingers, and that's a cow killer. So ants are also in this group.
Oh, right.
And again, they can be pests. Sometimes ants will tend to aphids. They'll protect aphids because aphids produce like this honeydew-like secretion, and ants like that. So they're farming aphids for the sugar, and they will fight off lady beetles to protect the aphids. So in a way, ants can be a pest. So it all depends on what you have going on in your garden. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Ants
Okay.
can be a pest in certain because they'll protect aphids, allowing the aphids to explode even further, and then the lady beetles cannot keep up. Yeah. But I think for the next course, I'm also gonna have a similar section like this, but we're gonna talk in detail about pests of, specific pests like, Japanese beetle, rodents, crepe myrtle scale, spotted lanternfly. I'll go through each of those and talk more about how to manage, how to identify, and kind of go through the little IPM process for a bunch of different pests. But this was just to give you a general sampling of the diversity of insects, some of the major horticultural group, and like what's your like one or two key identifying characteristics. So from here, you can go far away with, you know, looking for resources, identifying, and things like that.
So I have a question. I grew up on the Mississippi River,
Yeah.
and every summer they have these mass hatches of mayflies, and they always have to turn off the street lights in the town because they just swarm and pile, like end up with like 3 feet of deep of mayflies in the morning. So my question is why do bugs like that? Why are they attracted to light? Why do they moths too? Why do they or why are they drawn to light?
That's a really good question, and it's the best answer that I have for you is navigation, right? And so before the advent of lights and things like that, insects knew to fly by the sun or the moon to orient themselves. So anytime, you get like some headlights or a night light, I think insects are confusing that with the main light source, which is the moon. And so they're attracted to it. Many nocturnal insects have that. They use the moon for navigation and may be disoriented. That's what you call light pollution, right? Bees also use the sun for navigation. So on cloudy days, you don't see bees flying around as much if the sun is obscure because they use it to navigate. Moths use the moon to navigate. If you know the moon as being up, and that's the orientation. So, you know, you see it's kind of attracting the insect based on their kind of biology. Insects associate light with up and upward orientation, upward mobility.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, I think Pennsylvania gets mayflies too. When I lived there, yeah, driving home, yeah, you get them on the cars. Not as much as Mississippi probably, but
Oh, and they smell so bad. It's disgusting.
yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. My last experience was the cicadas. That I don't like. As much as I know about bugs, I don't like the cicadas. I don't. I
You
don't do
don't?
caterpillars either. I don't.
Well, I love the cicadas.
Oh no, I'll go inside quickly.
So you're not a cicada eater because some
No,
people like to eat them, right?
no, I haven't had a cicada. I have had bee larvae. So when I went to Penn State, we had they have like an annual like an insect like eat, eating zoo, and we used to prepare like crickets, waxworms, bee larvae, and used to hand it out to visitors to the insect fair, and you can I mean it's kind of weird, but they mostly have like a nutty sunflower seed taste. That's the best I can give you. And if you're allergic to shellfish, don't eat them because it's the same allergen. You can't, yeah. But I've had chocolate chip cookies with cricket parts. And the crickets were fed on apples, so it had an apple taste, like an apple nutty taste in the cookie. It was challenging, but more and more, I think there's been a couple startups around like eating insects as like a new protein source. So much less sort of resource intensive compared to like beef in terms of like, needing land and all that. Insect, protein is like leaner and all that. There's a whole thing behind it. But it's interesting. I'd say try it if you get the chance. You have a fun story.
Thanks, Jermaine. Great questions. Any other questions? And I'll give a few announcements too, or reminders real quick. All right, well, maybe let me pull up my slides and I'll give some quick reminders. And if there are any questions, we might have a few more minutes still at the end of class. Let me see. All right.
Of course, I'm glad to be here for your questions. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks, Jermaine. Yeah, just so a few reminders, please use this QR code to fill out the survey for tonight's class, take the short quiz on Moodle, check in on how much you remember about bugs. And our next class is this Saturday. So we'll see Jermaine again next week for the IPM class. But this Saturday, we have our water management class at UDC Van Ness. So it's in the same room that we've been in for the past few sessions. So I'll send this out again, but it's on Moodle too. Since you've been there before, hopefully now you know it and it's less confusing. But remember, the address is 4250 Connecticut Avenue. It's behind these mosaic sphere sculptures through that courtyard up to the 5th floor and in the multi-purpose room. And on Saturdays, the parking garage is free. So you can park in the parking garage that's right here, building 44 on Van Ness Street, and you can cut through. There's some images here of what cutting through the garage looks like. But also, if that's confusing, you can always just take Van Ness Street to Connecticut and come to the building here. But yeah, I'm looking forward to talking water management, especially with storms happening now. What can we do as gardeners to help with stormwater management and use the water we have to water our plants? And since I think now most people are getting their background checks approved, I'll be checking in. I think a few people still need to do that quick questionnaire to do the background check. But if you got the approval, great. Start diving into some volunteer opportunities. Remember all these places where you can look for opportunities, the newsletter, the Google site, Better Impact. Now, I'll be adding you to the listserv later this week. So sometimes people post opportunities there for you to check out. Lamont Riggs on Wednesdays and Saturdays, the Green Roof, flexible to your schedule. We're going to start some opportunities this coming Friday at Van Ness. Or sorry, not this Friday, following Friday. You'll see them on Better Impact. We're going to start growing some seedlings that we donate to school gardens. So we'll get thousands of seedlings, vegetable seedlings going for school gardens. So if you're able to come on a Friday morning, come on out. And tons of partner organizations to volunteer with too. So start plugging into some of those things. And I know I reviewed this last week, but just in case anybody missed it, thought I'd go over it one more time. Just a note as we get closer to the end on what the final test is and the quizzes. So remember, the quizzes are meant for review. It's not for a grade or anything. Doesn't determine whether you get your certificate or not. Just practice, really, refresher on the information. And for the final test, you'll have a 3-week window to take it, which will start the day after the last class. So you'll have 3 weeks after the last class to take the test at a time that works for you. It's open book, so you can use the resources that are on Moodle. There'll be around 90 multiple choice questions, and a passing grade is of 75%. And if you don't get that, you can always take it again too. And yeah, I don't think that I said you'll have, once you open the test on Moodle, you'll have a 3-hour window to take it. But it shouldn't take you that long either. It should take like under an hour, around an hour. So yeah, any questions about that? You can also feel free to write me, or I don't know.
Excuse me, Ali.
Yeah, please.
Just one question. The final exam is virtual too, or
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. It'll show up on Moodle. So if you scroll down all the way,
okay, perfect.
it'll be there. So I'll open up the test after the last class. So that
Perfect.
day after the last class, it'll be available to you.
Thank you so much, Ali.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, good question. Any other questions? Any other questions for Jermaine before we wrap up?
So next week we'll talk a little bit about, more into the IPM, how do I know this insect is a problem? Is it a problem? What are the steps to follow? What options do I have available in terms of like biocontrol, cultural control, chemical control, maybe. But we just talk about scouting and just, from top to bottom. So I'm glad you guys enjoyed, and I'm happy to see you next week, Wednesday. Have a good
Great. Thank you so much, Jermaine. Thank you, everybody, for your
Thank you so much for
participation.
the class.
Thank you.
Have a good
So
night.
good.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Thank you.